Hi everybody. Well, this video has been a long time in coming. I mean, for years I've been talking about how much I respect and like the Beatles albums from the United States, and people were saying to me, when are you going to make a video where you talk about this? I've been promising for years, and today is the day. So let's go. Okay, now to begin with, there are a few things you have to take into consideration, and I'm going to take into consideration. Of course, whatever it is that you grew up with, a lot of times that's kind of influencing your feelings naturally. If you grew up with the UK British albums and you're from England, well, naturally that's the most important thing to you. That's what you relate to best. And if you're like me and you grew up at first with the United States albums from America, then later on you came into the British albums, you kind of still have a fondness for them. And it wasn't always the case with me. There was a period where I really didn't want anything to do with the American albums by Capitol. So let's go through this. Now, as far as I'm concerned, to start with, there are about 4 points here that are usually brought up whenever people discuss which albums they admire, okay? Number one is, people say the UK albums is what the Beatles themselves and George Martin intended. Well, it's very hard to disprove that. I mean, you got me there. That's the truth. This is the way the Beatles wanted them. They wanted the UK arrangements. They would put out singles, and then they would put out albums, and it was a policy of theirs not to repeat putting the singles on the albums. They felt that that was making the fans pay more, or maybe they were gypping the fans, ripping them off or something like that. Of course, that's not the way the process was in the States, in the United States. The hit singles always were on the albums, and the way I look at it, saves you from having to buy a whole boatload of singles. That's the whole thing, you know. So I'm not going to be able to argue that, and I won't argue it. It's certainly what the Beatles intended, but even John Lennon in 1974 did an interview for WNEW radio with Dennis Elsis, and he was very clear where he said he didn't really like the album so much, and the Beatles made a lot of work and put a lot of input even into the sequencing of the tracks, the way they wanted them to sound and so forth. Well, to this I say, I love the Beatles, and I think the Beatles are the greatest artists ever as far as music is concerned. Number one, second to none. So naturally, I think they're pretty good when it comes to judging their music and performing their music. But as we all know, the Beatles weren't exactly always the best at business. So I kind of differ there, and I say, you know, leave the music to the Beatles, leave marketing and sequencing maybe to business people who understand how to present things a little better. That's not to say that the Beatles sequencing, the way they did it and the way George Martin did it, wasn't sometimes really, really good, and the songs flowed nicely. But I'm here to show later on in this video, I think, where some of the US albums have better choices to open albums, better choices to close albums, and maybe better sequencing in between. It's all a subjective thing, okay? So my big thing is, even though this is not what the Beatles intended, you have to consider that if you lived in the United States in the 1960s, and if you collected the Beatles in the 1960s, as those albums came out, they were very much a part of the timeline of the day. Very much nostalgia for people who were living there. So even though in the United States the Beatles albums were different than they were in Britain, it still was the 60s. These are not retro albums. These are not albums that came out in the 80s or 90s or something like that. These are the way they were in the 60s. Every bit as much a part of the growing up and childhood experience of living in the 60s as it was over in England for the UK albums. They're not hybrids that came along after the 60s. Okay, number two, the second point I want to address is they say the sound quality is better on the original British albums as compared to the US. Now, as we know, Dave Dexter Jr., that's kind of a dirty name there in the Beatles community. Dave Dexter Jr. Put a lot of reverb on some of the Beatles, the earlier stuff. And I went through a period in my life when I was a teenager where I kind of appreciated the fact that you really need the cleaner sounding, I thought at the time, UK albums. So I went through a period when I was 15, 16 years old where I was actually going to a store. Some of you might remember it was Times Square Stores, TSS for short. And I used to go there, and they had a lot of imports from England and Japan even, and the sound quality of those at the time was so clear, so crisp, and so clean. I understood what everybody had been saying from England, that this is the way you should hear these. They're so much cleaner than the Capitol album, so much more clarity. But that, now it's funny that for a period in that time, around 1977, 1978, 79, around that period, I wouldn't accept any U.S. albums. In fact, when people would say to me, hey, what do you think of the Yesterday and Today album? What do you think of the album Hey Jude? What do you think of Beatle Six, Beatle 65? I would say, there are no such albums. That kind of thing. Those albums don't exist. They're not real. That's what I used to say. Well, I have a totally different opinion now. And it's interesting that after I went through that, what I call now a phase or a fad, now in my older age, I kind of appreciate the U.S. albums better. And I got to tell you, I think that when I listen to a lot of this is sacrilege, and this is where the comments will come in, and please offer yours. But for me personally these days, when I listen to a lot of the UK original albums, I think they sound much too clean. They're without meat. They're too sterile. They sound very sterile, almost too dry. I don't know what other words to use. I think now the USA albums, a lot of times when I listen to them, they have a lot more punch. Some of them really sound like the Beatles are tired of more rocking, more of a force to be reckoned with. Now, the third point is, of course, with the UK albums, there are 14 songs on each album. Here in the United States, we only got 11 or 12 songs. Now, naturally, you'd rather have more than less. 14 tracks is better than 11 or 12. But it's ironic to me how when you watch the contents, the set list of the U.S. albums, there's so many tracks you seem to be getting more that in England, you had to rely on EPs. Here's the Record Store Day version of Long Tall Sally. This is a 4-song EP. And, of course, with Magical Mystery Tour, they had this little EP and only had the songs from the movie on it. So, I got to tell you, if you want to go the original way that things were intended in England, the truth of the matter is, you're going to be scurrying around like a squirrel looking for little nuts if you're winding up trying to get a complete collection of all the songs to hear rather than having them all on one album. It can get crazy. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'd rather have everything just on solid albums to listen to rather than having to have a mountain of singles and EPs to go through. Okay? So another thing is, it's kind of nonsense in a way when England said that, we didn't want to put the singles on the albums. The very first album, Please Please Me, that the Beatles did, you'll notice they advertised, they called the album Please Please Me, as a matter of fact, to capitalize on the single that was a big hit. And notice on the bottom, they also say, With Love Me Do, and 12 other songs. So the first Beatles album, they're actually promoting the singles, putting them on the album and promoting them. So that's just an interesting factoid. All right. Now we go to what I would call number 4. The Beatles, quote, hated the U.S. albums, and the Butcher cover was made sending a message to Capitol that they were tired of Capitol butchering their albums. Well, that's another one of those myths in Beatleland. It's not true. The photo here, Yesterday and Today album cover in question, this is not an original. This is a fake, by the way. I wish it was. It's really in great shape. But this particular cover here that they took for the Yesterday and Today album, this is absolutely, positively not a cover that was shot specifically for the purpose of putting on the album to send a message. I have some quotes here from Robert Whittaker. He was a kind of surrealist Dali fan who kind of liked to take shots, such as weird shots, to show the Beatles as humans, like George pounding some nails with a hammer into John's head and weird things like that, and the butcher smocks and the babies. And the quote here, he says, it was absolute nonsense, Whittaker says, that about them using it to send a message to Capitol. I was trying to show the Beatles as flesh and blood. He said it was a satirical take on the Beatles' absurd fame at the time. They're trying to show them more human. Ultimately, it wound up being an album cover, but it was not shot with that in mind, and it was not the purpose of it, and it's not even why it wound up being the album cover. Okay, now in the U.S., introducing the Beatles was pretty much the debut, the way that the Americans came to get a Beatles album. This is a VJ release, and it's the Please Please Me album, essentially. Okay, but in the States, the album that was really the kicker, the really great, the great release that came out was Capitol's Meet the Beatles. And this is a great album. It goes back to what I said. It doesn't matter whether or not it was intended to be this way by the band. It doesn't matter whether this is the way they sequenced it. The bottom line is, if you just listen to the songs, what are you listening for? Are you listening for intent, or are you listening for just a good collection of songs put together? This is a great album. It's a great album all on its own, and it's got a cover, same kind of cover as With the Beatles, but I dare say, I think it's more attractive as Meet the Beatles with the color and the kind of blue-tinted cover as opposed to the black and white. I think it's a more attractive cover. Now, what really stands out on this is when you first play the album, the opening track is I Want to Hold Your Hand. Come on. You know, you couldn't get that in England unless you got it as a 45. You also have I Saw Her Standing There coming right after that. And This Boy, which was the B-side in England, you got to buy the 45 of I Want to Hold Your Hand. I personally have to say I think it's a good collection of songs. A lot of stuff here taken from their album, second album With the Beatles. I think this is a much more overall pleasant listen. I think it's a better listen than With the Beatles. Okay, then my personal favorite album of all time, the Beatles' second album. Love the cover again. I like the collage of photos here, the brown tint that they got onto all of them. What I love about this album is that it absolutely rocks. It's got the Beatles at their rockin' best. It packs a real solid wallop. And you have She Loves You on here. Again, She Loves You, and one of my favorite songs, the B-side, I'll Get You, which, again, you got to scour around and keep on changing your speed. If you're in England, you got to put 33 and a third for the albums. Then you got to get the 45s and change speed to 45 RPM. Pain in the neck. Have it all here together. This is also very much Motown-esque. It's got like a Motown song, because they do some covers here like You Really Got a Hold on Me, and, you know, and say Please Mr. Postman, things like that. I love the way you have You Can't Do That on here, and you have the song Money, That's What I Want, which is fantastic. A great version by John, one of my favorite Beatle covers, maybe the favorite Beatle cover. But this is an album that really packs a punch, and it has the reverb on it, which again makes the songs really kind of like tough and more rockin'. And one noteworthy thing I want to put here is the song Thank You Girl, which again is another track that you can't get on a regular UK album. You got to buy the B-side or 45 or From Me to You for that. This was the place where Thank You Girl has extra harmonica in the middle and a harmonica at the end. And I have to tell you, I grew up with that, and to this day I cannot stomach listening to the original UK single, where it feels like you're missing something. You're missing a harmonica in that. And I never liked that. So this works all the way for me. Next up, we have A Hard Day's Night. In the US, this was a soundtrack album. So because it's a soundtrack album, not only do you get the Beatles songs on here, but you get some George Martin instrumentals. Now, a lot of people don't like listening to instrumentals. I can understand why the original UK version of A Hard Day's Night is preferable, because it's got all the movie songs on side one, and you got all the other non-movie songs on side two. But I have to say, I love Ringo's theme, This Boy. It's one of my favorite points of the entire Hard Day's Night film, and here you have the instrumental for that. And you have other instrumentals which are beautiful. And I Love Her is a beautiful instrumental. I love the I Should Have Known Better, really rockin' dance style kind of instrumental, and so on. So I actually like this, and if I want to get a feel of the movie, if I'm in the mood to familiarize myself and get the vibe of the film, I'll put this on. Oh, before I forget, another area where this trumps the original version is the song I'll Cry Instead. This has an extra verse. The US album, if you buy the original UK album, and if you were around in '64, you missed a verse from the song. So we got a bonus here in the US. So far, I see a lot of bonuses for the albums. And again, if you buy something new, I believe it's the mono version only. One of the two versions, the mono and stereo. You also get the long version of I'll Cry Instead. So either one of these two albums in the States, you know, whether it's the mono version, and again, I could be wrong. I don't know if it's the mono or the stereo, but one of them. You buy that here, and or you buy this here, you're going to get an extra verse for I'll Cry Instead. Now, what was also special about this album that you didn't get in England is the German version of I Want to Hold Your Hand, Komm, gib mir deine Hand. It's on here, and that's what makes this one special. Okay, so it's a standout. And, oh, lest I forget, every time I want to put one of these albums down, I forget things that actually I should have mentioned. And for example, on here you get Slow Down and Matchbox, which you had to go out and get the EP here. 4 songs, okay? So it's nice to have it as part of the album. Let's backtrack a little bit, because while I'm on the subject of discussing the EP of Long Tall Sally, also on the Beatles' second album, which I forgot to mention, you had to buy the EP to get Long Tall Sally and I Call Your Name, which were part of the album, okay? Much better than running around here like a chicken without a head trying to get every little song from all the 45s, as far as I'm concerned. Then we have Beatle 65, which I arguably would say is a more satisfying listening experience overall than listening to its equivalent counterpart in England, Beatles for Sale. What I love about this is you get, again, the singles. You get the single I Feel Fine and She's a Woman. And now a lot of people in Beatle fandom are completely split on this, but I like, and it wasn't always the case, I like the versions of She's a Woman and I Feel Fine, especially She's a Woman, that have the more harder sound reverb to it. And for those who don't know, and I'm going to ask people to fact check for me, I think that George Martin actually did the mix of the reverb versions of I Feel Fine and She's a Woman for here. That's what I've heard, not Dave Dexter in this. But whoever it is, I went through the period in my teenage years, I was like, blasphemy, blasphemy. How could they drench this in echo? It's not so clear and crisp. I'm sorry, but when I hear I Feel Fine and She's a Woman from the UK these days, it just sounds so tinny, so missing guts to it. I like it better this way. And this is just a nice collection overall, and I love the album. Are you surprised? Next album I'm going to show is Beatle Six. And by the way, a lot of people don't like this cover. What are they holding here? They're actually holding a knife. They were cutting a birthday cake. There's a birthday cake down here that's not part of the picture. But I mean, you know, they got photos here that are not used. The covers are nice, you know, that you don't see on the UK covers. And what's really a standout in this, besides the fact that you have Yes It Is on here, which was the B-side of Ticket to Ride in England, and you can't get it unless you get the B-side. You have it on here, but you also have a song, the cover version of Larry Williams' Bad Boy, that John Lennon rips apart with his vocal cords to sing. And what's really, really cool about it is, a lot of people may not know, they recorded Bad Boy in 1965 specifically for inclusion here in the U.S. market. We got Bad Boy here on this album before the Brits got it. So they had to wait until, I think, a year later, maybe, am I right, to get a collection of Beatles oldies. What do you know? So even the UK weren't beyond putting out compilation albums and, you know, reselling stuff like this. And on this, they have some of the singles, but they also put on here Bad Boy, the one I just showed you. By the way, I never could stand this cover. I never liked it. It's my personal opinion. Back to Capitol. We're going to go to the early Beatles, which comes a little late. This is finally a real chance from Capitol Records to get most of the songs that were on the first British album. That's why they call it the early Beatles. Now, if you already had, in the 1960s, Introducing the Beatles by VJ, the first album I showed, you had these songs anyway for the most part. So it's not like we didn't get them here until now. We had them earlier, even before Meet the Beatles. But some of the sequencing here I really like. I like Love Me Do. Well, Twist and Shout is the second track. Don't get me wrong. Twist and Shout is the perfect album closer on the original Please Please Me album. That's much superior as a closing track. But I like it here as a second track. So I kind of like the way they do things here. Ask Me Why closes side one. That's a nice kind of like bittersweet end to side one, and so on. Next album is going to be another soundtrack album. It's the Help album in the States. Now, a lot of people right away, I know you're out there and you're looking at this and you're like, oh no, not the Help album, all those instrumentals. Again, a couple of things I'll say about this album. First of all, the instrumentals, I loved them because I loved the movie and I'm a movie buff. So I remember when I was a kid, I liked to get the UK album. If you want to hear all the songs from the Help movie, it's brilliant the way they're just all on side one. Definitely, if you just want to hear the songs from the movie, the Beatles songs, the UK is the way to go. Side one has all of the tracks right from the film. You don't have to skip over any instrumentals. But as a movie buff, I like this, and I think this is a superior cover, to tell you the truth. I like the way the Beatles are standing on top of the Help symbol, the title. I like that very much. Standing like on a marquee for the movie. I like that. And of course you get a really swell back cover. And what we had here in the States was a wonderful gatefold showing scenes from the film. You didn't get that in England. Also, lest I forget, Help, the title song, has the James Bond introduction. A little bit of that sound from the movie that sounds like a 007 at the beginning to get you the feel of the movie. So there's some bonuses there, folks. Now we're going to go into an album that I know has a lot of Beatle fans split, but there are a lot of fans both for the US and UK. It's Rubber Soul. Now, on first look and first listen, and when you look at the tracks, you'll say to yourself right away, well, you're getting gypped here. There's stuff missing off here. There's no Drive My Car is not here. Nowhere Man isn't here. Also, If I Needed Someone's not here, and so on. What Goes On, there's stuff missing. Not for nothing, but I was never a big fan of Drive My Car. I'm not really that big a fan of What Goes On. I love all the Beatles songs, just some of them less than others. However, why people like this album, the ones who do, is because it's very folksy, like a folk album. And Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, this is the version that he heard that really blew his mind and made him want to do Pet Sounds. This version, not the UK version, this version. And as again, I'm nothing really to put down with the UK. You get more tracks, there's more. But growing up with this, I gotta say, this Rubber Soul album is so cool as a folk album, more acoustic sounding album in places. And I can't deal with this album without opening up with I've Just Seen a Face. I think I've Just Seen a Face that opens the US version is the perfect album opener. Over in England, it was just a filler track kind of thrown away on side two. The side two, by the way, of the Help album in Britain, to me, is such a mishmash of things all over the place that don't really flow right. Definitely think it's so much better having I've Just Seen a Face. When I listen to it, the beginning with the guitar and everything sounds like, I always say, a beautiful sunny morning coming through the blinds and opening the blinds up and waking up to the brand new day. Perfect introduction to the album. And on side two, also the track It's Only Love, opening up side two, which is, again, just a filler kind of tossed away track that's on side two of the Help album, opens up side two. And for those of us, and I know you're out there, who prefer the US version, that's what we like about it. But, it's what I grew up on. To me, Rubber Soul isn't Rubber Soul without those tracks. Now, here we get the controversial Beatles Yesterday and Today. Yes, this was the replacement cover. Originally, they did the Butcher cover, which got, of course, recalled. But something important about this album. First of all, of course, you get the single, Day Tripper, We Can Work It Out, double A side on here. You get the song Yesterday. Okay, so we missed Yesterday from Help. Well, it's here. You missed Drive My Car, Act Naturally, Nowhere Man, all these other songs. If I Needed Someone, they're all here. Okay? Now, I'm going to be talking about Revolver next. And that's really going to be interesting because Revolver is one case where the American version sucks as compared to the British version. But this came out before the Revolver album came out, in England even. So there are songs on here, I'm Only Sleeping, Dr. Robert, and Your Bird Can Sing. 3 Lennon tracks. You can see them there. that were on Revolver, but we got them ahead. That's right. People may not know the order. Even I didn't realize this for many years. So that's amazing to me to think that we actually got those 3 Lennon tracks ahead of England and ahead of the next album, Revolver. Of course, I'm not going to say that it's better to have, what do we got here? I think 11 tracks. 6, 7. We have only 11 tracks here in the U.S. They got 14 on Revolver, but it's not so bad when you consider we already had Yesterday and Today. We beat them to the punch with that. So the whole thing is, why would you want to repeat 3 songs? Talk about buying things over and over again. Why would you want the 3 songs you just bought on here on the Revolver album? Anyway, as I say, as a standalone album, it's the one case where I would really say the British UK album wins all the way, hands down. However, when you take the history in and the timing of the tracks released, I would say that there's reason why this is short-shrifted. Okay? Then we come to an album which, of course, is the crowning achievement of Capitol in a way, Magical Mystery Tour. You know the story. In England, you got this little dinky EP that only had the movie songs on it. And if you wanted to hear the songs, you had a couple of 45s in here. And there were like 2 tracks per side, except in one case where I Am the Walrus took up one whole side. So if you want to listen to the movie, you got to, the movie songs, you have to play 2 songs, flip over 2 songs, I Am the Walrus, 1 song, flip over. No thanks. In fact, England was so thrilled with this that now, as we know, the U.S. version of Magical Mystery Tour that also includes Hello, Goodbye, Strawberry Fields Forever, Penny Lane, Baby You're a Rich Man, All You Need Is Love. They took the singles and put this on a wonderful compilation that has all the songs from that era of '67 in one package. Much more satisfying experience, so much so that the whole Beatles catalog now has switched over in favor of this format, and everybody follows the Capitol model. This is the one time where people took a tip from Capitol. Hey Jude, which came out in 1970, really cool cover, really cool back cover. Tied up some loose ends here. This is where you can hear Hey Jude and Revolution single, Paperback Writer, Lady Madonna, Don't Let Me Down, Ballad of John and Yoko, Rain, and Old Brown Shoe. You know, the one thing that I'm really at odds with Capitol about is, as much as I'm praising them, you never got I'm Down and For Me to You and The Inner Light. I'm trying to think what other songs, but that's, other than that, those few songs are the only quibble I have. But look at this. In 1980, you got the Rarities album. There was also a Rarities album in 1980 from England, but first of all, the cover was not as nice as this. It was just a plain navy blue cover that just said in gold letters, Beatles Rarities. No photos. So even the Rarities album, I believe, is superior in ways. So the inside here is also a really nice gatefold. Features the butcher cover. Back then it was rare because you didn't really get to see it very often. And there's some nice shots of the Beatles in color over there. And there's a little more here than just your standard 45s and B-sides here. Although that's also contained here to fill in a few of the holes that you miss in the U.S. Anyway, folks, that's it. And I don't know if I've changed any minds there. Please let me know. I think I made a convincing argument that the U.S. albums are not the dogs that everybody thinks they are. And in some cases, we've got more, or maybe even just better arrangements than on the UK. So, thank you for watching. I look forward to your comments, and take care.